Nathan on.
I said hi in the chat. I
Okay.
told them while you were hopping off too that if there's any questions, feel free to shoot things in the chat as they come.
Okay. Um, so should I just go ahead and do this? Okay.
Yeah.
So, um, my name is Neat, and first I think it's really nice that I'm able to do this. Really happy to participate, and I want you guys, Lauren, Wendy, Nathan, that are watching this live, to stop me, ask questions. Some of this is tangential. It is a short excerpt of me. So I go by Neat. I am an EP. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm a cardiologist at the VA, and at times at the University of Colorado, I go there, or Anschutz Medical Campus, I go there a few days a month. So, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about who I am and where I'm from, where I've been, and where I'm going. And I was telling Wendy and Lauren this earlier, but please interrupt with questions. Otherwise, you're just going to hear me talk for a half an hour or so about myself, which, is not that interesting. So obligatory cute pictures. It's going to start from the beginning. We're starting from the first few days. So this is me somewhere. Can't remember, but pretty freaking cute, right? And I grew up in Philly, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I, want to ask you guys if this is me. Who knows? And I want you to be open. I'm not, offended. I think open discussions about things is important. Who knows what that is on my head? Anybody?
Full disclosure, I do not.
Lauren doesn't. Wendy? Nathan? Have you guys ever seen something like that before? Not really. You're like, maybe. So this is called a patka. It's Patka. And I grew up as a Sikh. And my parents are from northern India. They're from a region called Punjab, which means five rivers. They emigrated to the United States in the 70s, and they had both their kids, my brother and I, in Philly. So I personally am not terribly religious, but I'm more cultural. And one of the things that Sikhs do, some of them, not all of them, is keep their hair uncut. So women wear it out and grow it long. The purpose is it's natural. You're born with it. If you cut it, it grows back. Men tend to tie it like what I'm wearing now or what you saw the picture of to keep it out of the way. You can wear it out if you want to, but it's hard to look like an 80s rock star at work. So and then the tenets of Sikhism. This is not the purpose of this talk is not to talk about Sikhs, but it's all the other good stuff that religions say, so on and so forth. Some unique aspects are that you'll see men with their hair covered, boys wear the batka that I showed you in the last picture, and generally Sikhs tend to be vegetarian, so on and so forth. So here's India. We're gonna make an arrow from northern India. That's where Punjab is, and my parents are from a town called Ludhiana, and they moved to. I was supposed to give you clues as to what this is. Anybody, you guys know now. I told you this is Philly. So things Philly is known for is tasty cakes, big, and Allen Iverson. So when I grew up, everything was about Allen Iverson, tasty cakes, pretzels, cheesesteaks. We would sneak out, go to the city all the time. Loved, in general, loved growing up there. And you can imagine that for me, growing up in the Philly suburbs, I was the odd man out, right? I didn't look like everybody else, and my parents weren't like everybody else's, but I made it work, and I enjoyed it. And this is just some pictures of me with folks that I know like the names of, but don't know anymore because we were in middle school. The way that I made it work was I played a lot of sports, and wasn't great at them, but loved playing them. So I played football, basketball, and was part of all sorts of sports teams. This is my friend Erin that I graduated with. She's an allergist now. We still keep in touch. So where I've been is my whole life right around in that red circle from the day I was born. And in 2000, when I graduated high school, that's basically what I did. And my parents, my dad was an oral surgeon in India, but when he came to the U.S., they asked him to repeat medical school and to renew his degree, and it just wasn't. We didn't have the money. My mom was a PhD virologist, and she was working as a postdoc for $18,000 a month. We lived in an apartment in Northeast Philadelphia, right here where that dot is, Red Lion Road. My dad took a loan, would go to BU to renew his dental degree. He figured, okay, I can't be an oral surgeon, maybe I'll be a dentist. And he would take buses back down to Philly to visit my brother and I and my mom on the weekends. Long story short, we didn't have money to go on vacations. Like, we didn't go anywhere. And we once, I think, went to like the Jersey Shore. We took our 2 hour trip east to the Jersey, which was amazing. But that was it. That was like my little world. I decided to go to college 30 minutes from my house. Um, and I don't really have a great reason for it. If I had to go back, I would explore other colleges and see other places that I might have enjoyed. But my mom worked at Penn. She was a postdoc there. She eventually became a lab tech postdoc as a PhD, right? And then eventually became a director of vector core. So she develops viruses, which fast forward to 2021 is a super important thing. But back in 2000, because she worked there, I got a discount, which was great. And that was part of the reason that they said, you're going to go to that college. Like, it wasn't a go explore. It's like, it makes sense for you to go there. And I was lucky enough to get in, and it worked. And I decided that I liked math. I didn't really have a great reason for it. I didn't have this like eureka moment that I wasn't a kid that like tinkered with things. I was out playing games and playing sports most of my time. But I decided I liked math enough that I would try engineering, and I'd try bioengineering. So I went to Penn and studied bioengineering and electrical engineering. I'm not sure why I decided to do both. I think they overlapped a fair amount, and I didn't, I decided that my free time would be spent doing more engineering, which is kind of silly in college. It should not be. There's plenty of other fun things to do in college, but that's what I did. And I took a course in the electrical system of the human heart. It was a nice segue between bioengineering and electrical engineering. And today, what I do is directly related to both of these fields, and I use them routinely. We'll talk a little bit about that coming up. I worked with bioengineers at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, CHOP, that were making pacemakers for kids. And, I was a punk undergrad, right? Like, whatever, sophomore, freshman. But it was one of those things where I was like, wow, this is cool. These pacemakers are much smaller than they were when they first started in the early 1980s. and they're totally necessary because these kids can't sustain a heart rhythm without them. So I was interested in all sorts of stuff. How do the pacemakers grow as the kids grow? How do you change the battery? What if the lead becomes short because the kid's growing but the lead's not growing? How does the body accept the pacemaker? Why wouldn't it start to react against it since it's a foreign item implanted in the body? So on and so forth. All of that, decided at that point to go to med school. I did take a year hiatus at the University of Pennsylvania. Everybody takes some business classes. It's a big like business school. So Ivanka Trump was in my class. Who else? Charles Schwab's kid. So people that have money, right? I did too, and I decided that maybe I'll try investment banking. So I did that for 1 year. Went to New York. Hated it. Not my thing. Not my cup of tea. Was out right away, and so there was a year gap, and then I decided to go to med school. This is a map showing the distance between Philadelphia and DC, and I went to Georgetown. I was primarily excited to get the hell out of Philly. Like I would have gone to school anywhere that was not in that city because that's the only place I'd lived, and spent the subsequent few years in DC, which was phenomenal. Really enjoyed it, loved it, accrued a lot of loans, had fun with borrowed money, met my wife, so on and so forth. Through med school, and I don't, a lot of folks don't know what they're going to do. And I think you have to be super honest with yourself. And I kind of did. I knew that I was going to be cardiologist, and I knew that I was going to do EP. But most folks don't. So, scratch that if that's irrelevant to you. I think it's very reasonable to say, I have no idea. I'm just interested in exploring things that I'm interested in. And I also knew that becoming an EP was going to be a long road. And we'll talk about that a little bit as to how long it takes. Georgetown was 4 years, so med school is 4 years. Can't change that. That's just the way it goes. And after med school, you got to do residency. So I went to, I met my wife in DC. She was going to she was a tutor in DC. She was going to med school at the University of Virginia. And, we would hang out all the time and dated and then got married. And we were trying to figure out where to go together for training, and decided that we would go to the University of Michigan. Just had went and visited for residency and really dug it. It was Ann Arbor. It was the first time that I had been to the Midwest period, and also a smaller town, right? The other places that I've lived in and trained at were big cities. And residency is a mandatory time period, and it varies with regards to what you want to train in after medical school. Some residencies can be shorter, some are much longer, but internal medicine residencies required before cardiology fellowship. It's 3 years long. So we did that. She's a pediatrician. She did pediatrics. That's for 3 years. And then both of us were chief medical residents. So that was another year at the University of Michigan, who, by the way, won yesterday or in the Sweet 16. I hope you guys watched. Colorado. She is Pooja's from Miami. So she had enough of like clouds from May through October. So she was like, I don't want to stay here anymore, because we were very close to staying there for training, which is a marathon, but decided that we try something more sunny, and she got to pick because her process of matching for fellowship came earlier, and she was interested in Denver. And we had no particular, I had never been here. We didn't really have any ties to Denver. I had heard good things about it, and now have been here for 10 years. But we did I did cardiology fellowship. She did GI for 3 years, and then followed by cardiology fellowship. You do EP for 2 years, and then you're a cardiac electrophysiologist. So it's long. It's what does that add up to? 4, 7, 9 for me, right? And that's kind of absurd. Like, the question of does it need to be 9 years is a different question that I can opine on, but sadly, this is how long it takes.
Did you, sorry to interrupt, Nate, did you know it was going to be that long of a road when you first, yeah, okay.
So when I started med school, I knew that I wanted to be an EP, and I also knew that it was going to be a long road. And a lot of folks change, and I personally don't think that it needs to be this long, nor is it fair, right? Because people have lives that they need to lead. Like, they can't be training for a decade in their 20s to 30s. They have to move forward with life. So, but the ABIM that governs this process hasn't really changed it. They've trimmed it from 9 to 8, but that's a long time after medical school, right? That's
Mhm.
12 years of training. Anyway, the question you're asking, I think, what you're implying was, well, how do you pull off all that training without sucking at other things and just being unhappy? And the way you do it is you get somebody that really has your back. And ideally you do stuff together, and we did. So she had my back, and that was big. Um, Meaning understanding what some of these years are like, and they're long, like they're rigorous, but at the end of the day, you're doing something that you're interested in, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. No doubt the toil and effort is there, but when you finish, you have control again. Like, you can plan your day, like the position I am in now, where you can plan your day and love what you do from the start to finish. And some days are easier than others. And you try and keep it fun. Um, During training, we traveled a fair amount, and we took vacations, and we tried to keep it fun as much as possible, and that helped. Along the way, I realized that patients have, especially with complex things like what I do, patients have no idea what doctors are talking about. And it's not their fault. It's just, as a patient, as a person, there's a lot of pressure to, like, pretend you know. You know what I mean? I'm sure you guys have been in the position where, like, somebody's saying something to you and you have no idea what they're saying, but you're like nodding your head because you don't want them to think you're stupid. It happens to me every time I go to the mechanic. They're like, "Yeah, how about this and this?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, yeah, that sounds great. Do that." That happens every day in medicine, and it's not right. Like, it's a charged situation. People are sick. They, at baseline, can't really tap into their resources to be there with you and talk about what's best for them. They rely on your impression, and you as a doctor, the way you present something, the way your own opinions on it. And I think they take that and say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense for me," or not. Um, it's especially true with regards to surgeries, right? So I primarily perform surgeries, and often patients don't really know the intricacies and what we're doing. And I don't think they need to know the details necessarily, but what's important to me is that we're doing something that's right for them, that they feel is good for them, both short and long term, and they understand the expectations from it. And I just thought through the process that that wasn't the case. I ended up getting a master's of clinical science during my third year of cardiology fellowship. And the purpose of this degree, which, was basically to get the tools to try to understand some questions like, how do we get patients and doctors on the same page? And, with the pressures of the modern medical system, it's got to be relatively quick and efficient, and both sides have to ideally come to an understanding. And I think it leads to better communication and better results. Um, I also knew I wanted to give academics a shot. There's two worlds in medicine. It's private practice and academics, and both have their ups and downs. Academics for me allowed some time to try and solve this issue that I wanted to at least explore. I mean, I'm not going to solve the problem, but I wanted to take my little world, which was EP, and see if I can develop tools to help link patients and doctors. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So now I am in my start of my third year as a full-fledged EP. So that whole tree I showed, finished that, and this is year 3 of being an attending. So I'm junior faculty, and I primarily work at the Denver VA. I spend some time seeing patients and doing procedures at both the University of Colorado and Children's Hospital Colorado. My week is Monday is my research time. So I spend most Mondays doing the things that I'm going to show you next. Tuesdays, I'm doing surgeries and procedures at the VA. Wednesdays, I'm typically at the University of Colorado or Children's Hospital with colleagues putting devices in, doing ablations on kids. Thursday, I'm doing surgeries at the Denver VA again. And then Friday's my clinic. So it's got variety. I have both research time. I love procedural work. It's, basically problem solving. Sorry, somebody was going to ask a question.
Yep, that was me. Sorry. So how did you get involved with all three hospitals? Is that something that's standard for?
No, not
Okay.
not not standard, and some might say crazy. So I am mostly at the VA, but all of us here have appointments at the U. So the work, like in Denver, there are maybe 15 EPs, and in the city, and maybe a little bit more. And the university in the VA, at the VA, there's 2 of us, Paul Verosi and I, and at the university there's 6. So because the group is small, there's 8 of us total. We take turns, like taking call. So I was always connected to the U, and they had asked, like, hey, can you do procedures once in a while? And I said, sure. And through training, I got interested. I ended up doing a lot of procedures in folks with kids with congenital heart disease. So these are kids that are born with, different heart problems, coarctation, septal defects, so on and so forth. And there are a much smaller number of EPs that do procedures in congenital folks. So the pediatric EP, Johannes von Alvensleben, asked me, he's like, hey, can you come and help me once in a while, do stuff together? And, I shouldn't say me help him, we help each other. I learn a lot because I'm not a pediatric EP, I'm an adult doctor. So when they're small, I'm not trained to do that.
Totally
So
different anatomy, yeah.
totally different. So he does that. I talk him through it. And then for teenagers or really adults by that point that are still seen there, we tag team. Like we just did a procedure yesterday. An EP can take like our procedure started at 8:30 and finished at 5. So it was 8 hours. I mean, these can take a while because you're trying to find just that specific site at a specific place within the heart. Um, but let me just spend a minute talking about what is an EP, right? Because I think it's not a commonly known specialty. Basically, an electrician of the heart, and the other words, pacemaker doctor. So we work on the nitty gritty of pacemakers. We do ablations. And ablations are we take catheters, we stick them in the heart, we analyze heart rhythms, and we find areas that are responsible or participating in these arrhythmias, and we burn them. But you can imagine that it takes precision because you want to not burn the wrong area in a kid or an adult, and it can lead to problems. So going back to electrical engineering, what was a painful undergraduate like dual engineering, now I'm like, oh, that's great. I get the fact that there's a circuit here and there's a current and there's impedance, and I can apply this amount of energy at this site. So I think I am lucky in the fact that my prior training, a lot of which I've forgotten, like you guys are true bioengineers. I'm a fake, but I can tap into it a little bit and resurface some of that knowledge, which is helpful during procedures. So we talked about ablation, which is burning areas of the heart that might be involved in abnormal heart rhythms. And, EPs are super nerds. So you got to embrace it, love it. And I do. Like, we sit there and look at signals for a long time, and it's fascinating. And we're in the heart looking at areas and anatomy, and we learn. I learned a ton of anatomy, like when you're inside with a catheter and you're looking around with echocardiography or fluoroscopy and things like that. I'm going to show you a little video. Hopefully it plays, but this is an ablation procedure, and I don't want you to take too much out of this, but it gives you some understanding of, well, what is he talking about when he says ablation? So this is a procedure called aphoablation, and we've got catheters in the heart, and these catheters are like long noodles, and you see this like spider looking catheter spinning around, creating this pink chamber, and this pink chamber is the left atrium, and the colors just highlight the health of the tissue. So pink is healthy, red is not healthy. And the other catheter that's going through that green pipe, which is called a sheath, is an ablation catheter. So the number that you see, the blue number, that's the force that's applied by the catheter in the left atrium. And these dots, these cream-colored dots, are ablation sites. So we can conduct and burn areas of the heart. And here what we're doing is isolating sites of the heart called the pulmonary veins. And the pulmonary veins are areas that are responsible for AFib. So this is one of the procedures that we do, which is called aphoablation. There's tons of these that we do for different types of arrhythmias, but this gives you an understanding of what goes on in an EP lab.
Can I ask another question really quick?
You bet.
If you want to go back, how do you know the red tissue, or I guess like the software, how does it know that tissue is bad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So some of your colleagues, Lauren, are working with this company called Cardo. Are you aware of Cardo at all? No. So I'm trying to think of, I know Hind is, but so Cardo is a proprietary mapping system, and there's other analogous ones, Insight, Rhythmia. They all do the same thing, which is they help delineate the voltage in cardiac tissue. So the way that this works is that spider-looking catheter touches the inside surface of the heart, and it has bipoles on it. The heart is electrically active, so that myocardium, both in the atria, and that's the chamber that you're seeing here, and the ventricles, they're talking to each other because they're electrically active. It's the only organ that never stops, right? It can change its speed, but it never stops unless you're dead. So by measuring that voltage across those little poles, it can determine electrical health of that small segment. So we have to go touch each segment in the inside surface of the heart, and then it can tell you, oh, the voltage I measured between these 2 points is normal, whereas these other 2 points might not be normal. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. That is some smart technology.
Yeah, super cool, right? So, and the best part is this whole field, it wasn't even a field till 1999. Like,
So all of it is innovative and groundbreaking, pretty much.
20 years.
Yeah.
And in 20 years, it changed drastically. People like you are going to change it in the next 20 years because we're going to find better ways to do this. It's already happening. Where one of the things that we're doing now is we realized that voltage is directionally dependent. So if you measure voltage in one direction as opposed to another, you get a different result. So there are newer catheters that take multiple directionality measurements between two sites and then give you a point, which is much more accurate. So, I mean, I use that as an example to tell you that this is so intimately connected with bioengineering and with development of new technology to push this forward. This is very new as opposed to other fields in medicine, which are much more historically based. So one of the things that EPs do is we place ICDs, and ICDs are implantable cardioverter defibrillators. So this is, you guys probably seen this at the grocery store, at the airport, where you walk past and you see AED, right? Automatic electronic defibrillator. And public health has shown that if we have AEDs in grocery stores, airports, libraries, that if somebody has a cardiac arrest, we know, put the pads on, and the AED does the rest. It determines the rhythm. It says, that's not good. I'm going to shock you out of it, potentially save people's life. We know that teaching people CPR is very important, where if somebody has such an issue, you can start CPR. And what you're doing with CPR is you're pumping their heart because their heart electrically has gone haywire. What's fascinating is rate of bystander CPR varies based on educational level of an area. So if you take a well-educated city, Seattle, Denver, they do better than not so well-educated cities relatively, like Detroit. So if you have, and it's fascinating in the United States, if you were to have a cardiac arrest, you should have it in Seattle or Denver as opposed to Detroit. So ICDs are the same thing as those AEDs you see, but they're implanted in the chest. They're a much smaller version. They constantly monitor your heart. And if the heart were to have an abnormal rhythm that some people are at risk for, it would detect it and it would shock you out of it. It would save your life. So it's a surgical device that's placed in the chest, and it's done with for people with weak hearts who are at risk for sudden cardiac death. So here's an ICD. This is what it looks like. This is an X-ray, and in this X-ray, you see an ICD. So this is a device, and all of this is within the chest. This is a generator. The generator is the battery. This is a coil. A coil is where you can deliver high voltage energy to shock something. And there's two coils here. You see the thick parts. There's a coil in the RV, that's your right ventricle, and there's a coil in the SVC, that's your superior vena cava. This person has two leads in the heart. We won't go into that, but I labeled it. And it's a dual coil RV defibrillation lead. And on the other lead is a single coil lead. My purpose in showing you this is to tell you this is what an ICD looks like. Um, does the same thing as an AED, but an AED you need available externally, whereas this device you could be out in Wyoming hiking and have a problem, and this would save your life. Problem is that it does a lot of other bad stuff. It's not quite all unicorns and rainbows, right? There are problems like it can shock you when you don't need a shock. It got confused. And if it gets confused, it's not going to say, well, I'll leave this one alone because I don't think this is going to cause death. It's going to say, I'm confused. I'm not taking chances. I'm going to shock. And that's called an inappropriate shock. And people have those and they don't like it. It makes them, um, oh, Nathan, you work with David? Nathan refuses to talk. He's going to just chat. I work with David. Well, he's much smarter than me, and he works with colleagues of mine, but we are in the same areas often. So that's really, really cool to hear. He does great work with some of my colleagues. Um, and he was involved in this work with Dan Matlock, which basically they started to explore that people didn't know about defibrillators. They were told that they should get one because they were at risk of sudden cardiac death. And when that happens, you know, blinders go on. You're like, sure, doc, whatever you said, death, like, help me. But there's a lot of problems with defibrillators that they should know about but didn't. So that's my work. I mean, I was just funded by the VA to receive what's called a Career Development Award. And it's focused on helping veterans understand ICDs. And the reason I chose veterans is ICDs are complex. For instance, in the VA, there's only one site in our VISN that performs this procedure, which is Denver. So if you live in Wyoming, Nebraska, New Mexico, Idaho, most of Utah, you come here for your defibrillator, and it requires routine care. You come here twice a year, Paul, our ICU, we look at your device, we make sure it's working okay. You have to get a battery change every 10 years. If you do have inappropriate shocks that we talked about where there wasn't a problem, the device got confused, lots of people get PTSD, which is already a big problem at the VA. So these are things that I wanted to work on so that people that were considering these devices could understand that. So it's a 5-year project. It's supposed to start this summer. And the output from this project is tools to help patients and doctors discuss ICDs, the good and the bad, to figure out whether it's right for them. You'd be surprised. Some people say, Doc, I get it. My heart's weak. I don't want this thing in my chest. I'd rather just go when it's my time, which is totally okay. Other people say, Doc, I'm very afraid of, dying. I need this. Let me have it. And in either scenario, we want to make sure that there's an informed decision. The tools that we are going to make are going to be incorporated in the VA system so they're used before any veteran gets an ICD. So then we're sure that they actually wanted it and they understood it. And the VA conducts about 1,000 of these a year. Each one of these procedures is hundreds of thousands of dollars. That device is super expensive, and that's not that money is important, but it's a mandate that came out to do this process because nationally we wanted to make sure that people were getting this device for the right reasons and wanted it. So, I put this up there just to show you guys that there's this total complex nature of healthcare decisions, right? If you look up top, there's a patient provider relationship that's dependent on social factors and trust and health status. There's an approach that patients take, which, some patients say, I need to make this decision. A lot of others say, well, you're the doctor, like you know this, you make the decision for me. And providers are all over the place. Some love saying, yes, I am the doctor, I need to make. Others, say, well, we need to do this together. It's, yes, I am the expert, but we're doing this on you and for you. And there's a lot of values that may be different between patients and providers. Patients, I think a lot about psychological risk, like PTSD, anxiety. They have some understanding of benefit, right? They like think that, oh yeah, this is supposed to help me live longer or not live longer, or maybe live longer or not. Maybe it prevents me from dying. I'm not really sure. And they may not know about inappropriate shocks and then complications with the procedure itself. You can imagine providers love overemphasizing the benefits. Like, you need this, everybody needs this, where that's not necessarily true. There's a total relative risk benefit ratio. And I think that providers don't really talk about the psychological risks because they don't see patients every day. And I've had folks say to me, um, I've had numerous patients, I got shocked when I was in the kitchen. Now I can't go past the kitchen because I feel like my device is going to get shock me. I went to war in Vietnam. I look at my chest and I see this metal thing in my body and I think of shrapnel. So there's tons of different examples, and we want folks to know about that. So the way that we're going to approach this project is we've got the Denver VA. We're going to identify and collect data. And we've got three populations: people that have already undergone ICDs, so they have an ICD in their chest; people that are referred for ICDs; and then people that were referred for ICDs in the past that we've got a log of, but said, no thanks. And we're going to talk to them about decision care, analysis, and how they process this decision, so on and so forth, and do what's called qualitative analysis to figure out what key themes emerge. And these are some of the domains that we're going to look at, PTSD and shock, VA-based ICD care, which is different than the community, anxiety, depression, knowledge, values concordance, communication, demographics. We plan to talk to all sorts of providers. So before you see someone like me, you generally see a general cardiologist, and there's primary care doctors, there's geriatricians, there's nurse practitioners, and we're curious, all of these folks are involved with patients that have ICDs or need ICDs. So any one person can color somebody, can say, oh, I would never get that. And then you'd be surprised what that leads to with regards to opinions from that patient. So we're curious to see what folks think about ICDs and what their perception is of decision aids that might help them introduce the concept of ICDs to patients. So, at the end of the day, what are we actually getting out of this? We're, here on the left, you see we're getting a lot of categories that we're going to discuss with patients. We're going to build veteran-specific features to these different tools: a video, a website, and an infographic pamphlet that patients and providers can use to talk about this. And this is an example of a decision aid. So this explains to patients what benefit an ICD has. Like someone with heart failure, if they didn't get an ICD, 100 people, 36 die, 64 live. If you do have an ICD, you save 7 lives. You don't save everybody. So that's an important thing to know, and it's hard, I think, for doctors to get that across. And hopefully things like this, or a video, or both, or a website will help. I wanted to spend just a few minutes on, other things that I do. That's kind of my health services research project, but I also look at biophysics of catheter ablation, research surrounding the delivery of EP procedures, primarily within the VA. And then I'm working with a few folks, Steve Lammers, Blair, who else is in my group? Isha, and yeah, that's the four of us that are building a device for ablation. So, this is some other work that I do, and here I'm looking at, this is my schematic. Like, here's heart tissue, here's ground, and here's my ablation catheter. Ablation catheters have these little pores at the end that fluid comes out of, and the fluid that comes out of those pores is normal saline. And when you apply energy, you get shunting of current away from the site, and you get whatever ablation lesion you get. So one of the things that we did was we changed that fluid to half normal saline, meaning it's got less ionic dispersion, and we saw that, boy, you get bigger lesions. So if you have some arrhythmogenic tissue that's deeper, you can use this strategy. So this, I show you this as an example of things that we're doing that connect to electrical engineering so intimately, and bioengineering as well, with regards to impedance characteristics of tissue and electrical dispersion of irrigation. So this is the stuff that we're working on. I think, Wendy, you might know Ruba, Ian, and Kenny. So that's my group. That's my senior design team, and they're building this for me. This is a probe shown on the right with 4 infrared thermistors that sits in the esophagus and measures temperatures as we burn the left atrium. Because one of the things that can go wrong is you can burn the left atrium into the esophagus. So that results in death. So this is a newer way compared to the standard of care, which is just this terrible single point thermistor that we're trying to develop so you can keep an eye on what the temperatures are. So these folks have done a great job with regards to building schematics of energy transfer that we're going to study. And we, meet Fridays to talk about this. So I won't go on any longer. I think I might have overstayed my welcome there. It's almost 5, but I wanted to give you this broad lay of the land with regards to where I'm from, how I got here, how I got lucky in some way to connect what I learned in the past a little bit to what I'm doing now. But I think that the key here is, please do explore opportunities that come along the way. I think that's important. Start and finish stuff. You might not like it when you finish it. You might look back and said, boy, not doing that. And that's fine. But I think starting and finishing it gives you the process of experiencing the whole thing to completion. Nothing comes easy. Toil and perseverance are inevitably required, but I think for me, I truly enjoy the day that I have, and I think that's key. So that makes up for kind of a long training path. Is when you're really liking what you do. And these are some future bioengineers. These are my girls.
That's so funny. You had a brother, and now you have 2 little girls.
Yeah, and my brother and I were very brotherish. Like, we punched each other a lot and did stuff like that. So I'm learning, learning life with the girls.
Yeah, it's very different, I'm sure. This has been an incredible talk. I have a ton of questions for you about the technical things, but I'll follow up via email or something, talk offline about it.
You
Nathan, do you have any questions?
Hi. No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you for joining. This is awesome. I kind of did the same, sort of did the same thing as you, and kind of figured out I wanted to go into bioengineering because it was kind of a convenient location and where I wanted to go, and then kind of jumped into it. But now I'm absolutely where I want to be, absolutely following my passion. So it's really interesting to see how the medical field can elicit such passionate people, kind of sometimes unintentionally.
Yeah, right. But you know, all these things are linked. So we can't do the work we do without advancing the bioengineering principles of things. So great to meet you guys. Happy to